A woman stands on the edge of a severed sea, her bare feet sinking into wet sand. Shifts of biblical history. The exact moments where the entire redemptive timeline hangs by a single, fraying thread. You will find a very different pattern. You will find she is not offering a religious consultation. She is pronouncing a cosmic verdict. Huldah validates the scroll. She confirms the impending destruction of the city. She prophesies disaster for the idolatry of the people, but she offers peace to Josiah because his heart was tender. And the 5 most powerful men in the nation bow their heads, take her words, and carry them back to the palace as the absolute, unquestionable voice of the divine. Think about the historical gravity of this moment. The core document of the Jewish faith, the foundational text of the covenant that will survive the Babylonian exile, is authenticated entirely by the authority of a woman. A king tears his royal robes. A high priest holds his breath. A nation waits for the hammer to fall. And a woman tells them exactly where it will land. She is the pinnacle of the Old Testament bypass. She is the final major prophetic voice, speaking into the political destiny of the kings of Judah before the catastrophic darkness falls. Because shortly after her prophecy, the city burns. The heavy cedar doors of the temple collapse in a shower of sparks. The stone walls are shattered. The people are dragged away in heavy iron chains to Babylon. And then, the voice of the prophet goes violently silent. A woman stepping into the void, speaking with the voice of the divine. The question is not whether women prophesied. The text makes that undeniable. For 400 agonizing years, the heavens are like brass. There is no Naba. There is no bubbling up. There is no word from the Lord. Until the silence is finally broken. But it is not broken by a man. The sky turns to brass. The visions stop. The ink dries on the parchment. A generation dies in exile. Another generation returns to rubble. Babylon falls to Persia. Persia falls to Greece. Greece falls to Rome. The world bleeds. The text remains quiet. The physical temple is rebuilt in Jerusalem. The heavy stone blocks are hauled into place. The bronze altar is lit. The priests resume the daily slaughter of lambs. The smell of burning fat rises over the city, but the fire of the Naba never returns to the Holy of Holies. The prophetic fountain is bone dry. The men read the old scrolls. They memorize the ancient words. They argue over the grammar. They form factions. The Pharisees build fences of extreme legalism around the Torah. The Sadducees strip the supernatural entirely out of the text. The Essenes flee into the desert to hide in caves. The temple courts are transformed into a marketplace. The question is, why they prophesied when they did. And the answer changes how you view the entire structure of biblical authority. For centuries, we have read, the air smells like copper coins, unwashed pilgrims, and animal dung. Religion is now an industry. The men in charge have turned the covenant into a business, and the Spirit of God refuses to participate. The 400 years are not a divine failure. They are a quarantine. God is starving the corrupt system out. He is letting the machinery of religious industry run until the gears grind to a deafening halt. The era of the earthly kings is permanently over. The era of the physical sword is ending. The heavy veil hanging in the temple is preparing to tear. When the prophetic word finally returns to the earth, it must be untainted. It cannot be filtered through the politics of the Sanhedrin. It cannot be purchased by the wealth of the aristocratic priests. It must emerge from a vessel that the world considers completely irrelevant. The pattern holds. The people expect Elijah to drop from the clouds. They expect a warrior with a sword of fire. They expect a political revolutionary to march into Jerusalem and slaughter the Roman garrison. They are looking for a man of violence to restore a kingdom of men. They are looking in the wrong direction. When the silence shatters, the stage is completely different. The new era does not begin with a king in a palace. It does not begin with a general on a battlefield. These women as exceptions to the rule. We view them as anomalies, emergency backups, or interesting footnotes in a male-dominated narrative. They are not footnotes. It begins with the ultimate bypass. The voice bypasses the entire religious establishment. It bypasses the high priest in his embroidered robes. It bypasses the Roman governor in his marble palace. It bypasses the religious scholars arguing loudly in the courtyards. It searches for the lowest possible denominator of earthly power. It searches for a widow, and it finds her waiting in the dark. The limestone floor of the temple courtyard is freezing in the pre-dawn dark. The air smells like old smoke and crushed frankincense. Thousands of pilgrims will flood through these heavy bronze gates in a few hours. But right now, the shadows are long and quiet. In the corner of the women's court, an 84-year-old widow kneels. Her name is Anna. Luke's gospel gives us her pedigree. She is the daughter of Phanuel, of the shattered northern tribe of Asher. But the text gives her a much heavier title. Before anyone in the New Testament preaches a single sermon, before any apostle is called by the edge of the sea, Luke gives this impoverished widow the exact Greek equivalent of Miriam's ancient title. She is a prophetess. She has not left the temple complex in decades. She has survived through fasting and through prayer. Sleeping on cold stone. Our structural load bearers. Trace them through the text. And a shocking rhythm emerges. They appear at the exact moments when the established systems fail. While the political fortunes of Jerusalem violently shifted around her, the Romans conquered the city, their iron boots echoing on the pavement. The Herodian kings built their massive, paranoid fortresses. The aristocratic high priests turned the sacred sanctuary into a corrupt, highly profitable banking system. The priests step over her. The wealthy Sadducees ignore her. To the religious establishment running the sacrificial industry, she is completely invisible. An elderly widow with no husband and no wealth has zero institutional leverage. But her poverty is not a lack of blessing. It is her immunity to the corruption around her. Her waiting is not a tragic story of a lonely old woman. It is the physical embodiment of the 400 years of prophetic silence. She is carrying the spiritual exhaustion of the entire nation in her fragile, aging bones. And then, a poor carpenter and his teenage wife walk into the courtyard, carrying a 40-day-old baby and 2 cheap pigeons. Simeon, an old man, takes the child in his arms and blesses God. But Simeon is not called a prophet. Anna steps forward. The text says she approaches at that very moment. The long, agonizing quarantine of the prophetic voice is over. The silence finally shatters against the crying of an infant. Anna looks at the child, and the ancient Naba, the fountain. Priesthood is corrupt. When the kings are blind, when the men in charge have compromised the covenant, that is when the women rise. That spoke on the beach through Miriam. The authority that commanded armies through Deborah. The razor-edge verdict that judged kings through Huldah bursts back into the world. She begins to speak to everyone looking for the redemption of Jerusalem. She becomes the very first human being to publicly preach the arrived gospel. But Luke uses a very strange, highly specific Greek word to describe exactly how she speaks in that courtyard. And that single word reveals the true, underlying function of every woman prophet in the biblical text. Luke chapter 2, verse 38. An elderly widow stands in a noisy, crowded temple courtyard. She looks at a child wrapped in cheap cloth, held in the arms of an old man. And the text says she begins to speak. Most English translations soften this moment. They tell us she simply gave thanks to God. But the word Luke uses to capture her voice is the Greek verb anthomologiomai. It is a massive, highly specific compound word. It is built from 2 pieces. The prefix is anti, meaning against, opposite, or in return. The base is homologio, meaning to speak the same thing, to agree, or to confess. When you put them together, entomologiomai is not a warm feeling of gratitude. In ancient Greek legal documents, it was used when 2 parties finally settled a debt and signed their names in mutual consent. God does not use these women to simply fill a gap in the roster. He uses them to bypass the corrupted institutions entirely. It means to publicly and loudly declare your absolute agreement with another party. It means to echo a truth back to the source that spoke it. This is the only time this exact word appears in the entire New Testament. That root changes everything. When Anna opens her mouth in the courtyard, she is not offering a polite prayer of relief. She is formally, prophetically agreeing with the incarnation. She is looking at the baby, looking up at the heavens, and declaring that the ancient promises have been kept. The priests walking past her in the courtyard are busy maintaining the machinery. They are collecting the temple tax, inspecting the sacrificial lambs, and protecting their political relationship with Rome. They are speaking the language of industry. Anna is speaking the language of reality. Her praise is not a polite reaction. It is a cosmic realignment. This is the true thread connecting every woman prophet we have seen, from the edge of the severed sea, to the shade of the palm tree, to the dusty room with the lost scroll, to the cold stone of the temple. When the men built religious monopolies and military alliances to secure their own power, they fell out of alignment with the divine. The institutions drifted into self-preservation. The women were the corrective echo. They bypassed the corrupted structures and spoke the homologio, the same word. They dragged the nation back to reality. And this role does not disappear after the resurrection. To see this pattern, we have to start at the very beginning. We have to go back to the beach, back to the sea. It does not fade away when the early church begins to form its own leadership structures and appoint its own men to oversee the expanding network of believers. It explodes outward. Because decades after Anna speaks in the temple, the heavy curtain rips in half. The gospel spreads to the edges of the Mediterranean. And in a white stone house by the sea, a man raises 4 daughters, and all 4 of them carry the exact same fire. The sea breeze blows through the stone windows in Caesarea, Paul of Tarsus, dragging the physical toll of 3 brutal missionary journeys. Walks into the home of Philip, the evangelist. He drops his heavy travel bags on the floor, and he is greeted by 4 young women. Luke gives them exactly 1 sentence in the book of Acts. He had 4 unmarried daughters who prophesied. He does not record their sermons. He does not quote their words. He does not explain their ministry. He just states it as a matter of absolute, unarguable fact. The fire is no longer contained. It is no longer isolated to 1 judge under 1 tree. It is no longer reserved for 1 widow in 1 temple courtyard. The veil is torn. The Spirit has poured out on all flesh. Son prophecy. Daughters prophesy. Old men dream. Young men see. The ancient hierarchy is completely leveled. The monopoly of the priesthood is shattered. The gatekeepers have lost the keys. But human nature always tries. Of reeds. Where the air is still damp with the spray of a miracle, we have to look at the very first time to rebuild the gates. We still build heavy cedar doors. We still construct massive, bureaucratic, religious industries. We still assume divine authority only looks like a man in a tailored suit with a microphone, a board of directors, and a framed theological degree on his office wall. We still try to contain the Naba, that bubbling, terrifying, uncontrollable water of the Spirit within the safe, predictable boundaries of committee approvals and denominational bylaws. We want a God who respects our organizational charts. We want a God who only speaks through the proper channels. But God has never respected a corrupt organizational chart. When the modern church functions more like a corporation than a body, the Spirit bypasses the boardroom. When the pulpit becomes a political stage for earthly power, the Spirit bypasses the platform. He goes to the margins. He goes to the unnamed. He goes to the people the establishment has deemed irrelevant, uncredentialed, or unqualified by human standards. The prophetic voice is not an institutional credential you inherit. It is an irrepressible fire you cannot extinguish. It is the theological architect standing on the beach. It is the general's courage sitting under the palm. It is the razor edge of truth speaking in the dusty room. And when you step back and look at the entire sweep of the biblical timeline, you realize the presence of these women is not an anomaly you have to explain away. It is a rhythm, Hebrew language assigns this massive spiritual title to a human being. The title is Nebiah. But to understand what Miriam is actually doing on, a rhythm that pulses through the entire text, and a rhythm that demands a response from anyone willing to listen. A woman stood on the edge of a severed sea, and a nation of slaves learned the theology of their freedom. A woman sat in the shade of a palm tree, and a paralyzed army found the courage to march into the storm. A woman held a tent peg in a nomad's tent, and the invincible iron of a Canaanite king was broken in the mud. A woman read a crumbling scroll in the second quarter, and the highest men in the kingdom bowed to the verdict of God. A widow waited in the freezing temple, dark, and 400 years of silence finally shattered against the crying of a child. 4 daughters opened their mouths in a house by the sea, and the ancient monopoly of the priesthood was permanently leveled. The institutions failed, and the spirit found a new door. One thread, one story, but here's the part I keep coming back to. The limestone floor of the temple courtyard. Anna, sleeping on cold stone, while the aristocratic priests stepped right over her to maintain their massive, highly profitable religious machine. They had the embroidered robes. They had the heavy titles. They held the iron keys to the bronze gates. The water is still walled up on either side of her, holding back the ocean, shivering like glass. That sand. You have to understand what the word meant before the palaces and the temples complicated it. But when the redemption of the world actually walked into the room, wrapped in cheap cloth, they were completely blind to it. The poverty that made her invisible to the establishment was the exact thing that kept her immune to its corruption. If you are in a season where you feel completely sidelined by the religious structures around you, Anna's courtyard is a place to sit. If you have been told your voice does not matter because you lack the proper credentials, the right background, or the approval of the men in the high places, listen to the rhythm of the text. Your lack of a title is not a disqualification. It is an uncompromised slate. The Spirit of God is not waiting for a committee to vote on your calling. He is not constrained by the institutional plumbing. When the establishment drifts, He looks for the ones willing to speak, the homologio, the ones willing to simply agree with reality. And may the God, who has never once been stopped by a closed door, meet you outside the gates and give you the courage to speak the truth when the systems fall silent. Exodus chapter 15, verse 20. The nation has just survived the impossible. The sea has closed. The wood and iron of Egyptian chariots are floating in the surf. And Moses has just finished singing a lengthy, formal hymn of victory. And then, the camera of the biblical narrative pans away from the central male figure. The text shifts to a woman holding an instrument. Then Miriam, the prophetess, the sister of Aaron, took a timbrel in her hand. The word your English Bible translates as prophetess is the Hebrew nebiah. It is the feminine form of the noun nabi, the standard biblical term for a prophet. But to grasp the physical weight of what Miriam is actually doing on that sand, you have to dig down to the root verb, naba. When we hear the English word prophet, we immediately think of someone predicting the future, like a mystic looking into a crystal ball. But the Hebrew root naba has almost nothing to do with predicting tomorrow. The root literally means to bubble up, to pour forth, or to spring out. Picture a hidden underground aquifer finally bursting through cracked, dry dirt under immense pressure. That is naba. It is an uncontrollable, irrepressible overflow of words spoken under the direct influence of the Spirit of God. The wind is howling, carrying the smell of salt and the distant, muffled screams of dying warhorses. A biblical prophet is not someone who sits at a wooden desk and calculates theology. A prophet is someone who experiences a buildup of divine reality, so intense that they simply open their mouth and the water bursts forth. When you understand that etymology, the scene on the beach transforms. Miriam is not a backup singer. She is a theological architect. In the ancient Near East, religious authority was heavily centralized around patriarchal systems. Men held the titles, men guarded the shrines, and men interpreted the gods. Yet here, before the tabernacle is even built, before the Levitical priesthood, is even established. The text hands the highest spiritual title to a woman. She is the first person in the entire biblical narrative to be explicitly called by this prophetic title in the active moment of leadership. When she strikes the skin of the tambourine and sings, "Sing to the Lord, for he has triumphed gloriously," she is doing something profoundly subversive. She is not just celebrating a military victory. She is interpreting the Exodus. She is giving 1,000,000 traumatized, displaced slaves the theological framework for who their God actually is. The men held the weapons, but a woman articulated the meaning. This is the precedent the text establishes on page 1 of the nation's freedom. But centuries later, when the Israelites are finally settled in the promised land, that bubbling fountain of authority will be needed again. In her hand is a tambourine. She does not cower. She does not look back at the chariots of Egypt. The men in charge will paralyze in fear. The established systems will break down, and the Nebiah will reappear. Only this time, she will not be found standing by the water. She will be found sitting under a palm tree, preparing for a brutal war. The sun beats down on the hill country of Ephraim. The air is thick with dust and terror. 900 iron chariots patrol the valleys below. The main roads are completely abandoned. Travelers creep through mountain passes in the shadows. Village life has ceased. Israel is bleeding out under the boot of a Canaanite king, and the men in charge are paralyzed. She sits under a palm tree between Ramah and Bethel. Her name is Deborah. The text gives her 2 massive titles. She is a judge, and she is a Nebiah. She is not hiding in a cave. She is holding court in the open heat of the day. She sends a message to a general named Barak. She delivers a direct, tactical, military command from God. Gather 10,000 men. March to Mount Tabor. God will draw the Canaanite army to the river and hand them over. Barak hesitates. He looks at the iron chariots. He looks at the odds. He makes a startling demand. He will only march if she marches with him. Most readers gloss over this moment. She lifts the instrument, strikes it with her palm, and begins to sing. She is Miriam, and she is the first. But she will not be the last. Barak's request is not a compliment to her leadership. It is a failure of his nerve. He wants the visible presence of the prophet to guarantee his safety. Deborah does not argue. She simply stands up from the shade of the palm. She tells him she will go. But the glory of the campaign will no longer be his. The honor of the final kill will go to a woman. Deborah is not a mascot for the army. She is the engine of the deliverance. They march out to the river Kishon. The Canaanite iron chariots charge into the valley. But the sky turns black. The rain falls in sheets. The river surges over its banks. The invincible iron sinks deep into the thick, wet mud. The enemy general abandons his chariot and flees on foot to a nomad's tent. And a woman named Jael hands him milk, waits for him to sleep, and finishes the war with a tent peg and an iron hammer. The palm tree is not just a geographical detail. It is a theological indictment. In a healthy Israel, disputes are settled by priests at the central sanctuary. In a healthy Israel, generals lead the charge with confidence. But the system is broken. The leaders are terrified. The conventional structures of power have completely collapsed under pressure. God uses a woman under a tree because the men in the high places have lost their courage. Most people assume the biblical prophetic office is exclusively a fraternity of bearded men standing in the wilderness. We picture Elijah calling down fire on Mount Carmel. It is a deliberate, divine bypass. And centuries later, that exact same bypass will happen again on a much larger, much more desperate scale. Because when the kingdom is literally hours away from spiritual and physical destruction, the king of Judah will not ask the high priest for the word of the Lord. He will not consult the male prophets walking the streets. He will send his men to find a woman living in the 2nd district of Jerusalem. There is a structural reality we have to confront if we want to understand what the Bible is actually doing with these women. The ancient Israelite ecosystem was built entirely on male mediation. The system was designed around temples with heavy cedar doors and gold-plated altars, operated exclusively by a male priesthood. The high priest stood between the people and God, wearing a heavy breastplate covered in precious stones. He alone was authorized to step into the darkest room, to sprinkle the blood, to secure the atonement. The armies, with their iron swords, were commanded by male generals. The thrones were occupied by kings. When these institutions functioned according to the covenant, the system worked beautifully, but human institutions always rust. The priests become politicians. The kings become tyrants. The generals become cowards. The heavy stone walls of the temple. We picture Jeremiah weeping in the streets of a burning Jerusalem. We picture Isaiah standing in a smoke-filled temple, his lips touched by a burning coal. No longer house the presence of the divine. They only protect the power of the men inside. And what happens when the priest forgets how to listen? What happens when the king stops reading the scroll? God ignores the hierarchy. These women are not random anomalies. They are a deliberate architectural bypass. When the plumbing of the official religious system gets clogged with corruption and fear, the water of the Spirit does not just stop flowing. It finds a new channel. It bursts up through the floorboards. This is deeply offensive to human structures of power, because we love chains of command and official credentials. But the presence of a Nebiah in the text is not just a story of female empowerment in the ancient world. It is a theological critique of institutional failure. If watching the biblical text dismantle broken religious systems is answering questions you have carried for a long time, you are exactly who this channel is for. Drop a thought in the comments and hit subscribe. Because every week we dig past the traditions to find what the text actually says. So the divine bypass continues. It does not stop with the era of the judges. It escalates. Fast forward 300 years from Deborah's palm tree. The monarchy is rotting from the inside out. Decades of violent idolatry have left. We assume that when God faced a national crisis, when empires shifted or earthly kings needed to be broken, he only ever looked for a man. The nation, spiritually hollow. Altars to foreign gods have been built right in the courtyard of the Jerusalem temple. The sickening smell of incense, burned to idols, hangs thick in the air. Then, a young king named Josiah orders a desperately needed physical renovation of the temple. Deep in the dusty, forgotten storage rooms, the workers find something buried under decades of debris. Ascroll, the book of the law. When the king hears the ancient words read aloud, he literally tears his royal robes. He realizes the nation is under an imminent, terrifying curse. The covenant is completely broken. He needs a word from the Lord immediately. He needs to know if the wrath of God is already in motion. Jerusalem is full of men with religious titles. The high priest, Hilkiah, is standing right there in the room. The famous prophet Jeremiah is already ministering in the land. Zephaniah is walking the streets. But when the king's top advisors walk out of the palace with the fragile, newly discovered scroll in their hands, they do not go to the high priest. They do not go to Jeremiah. They walk straight to the second quarter of the city. To find a woman, the air in the stone house is thick with anxiety. 5 men stand in the doorway in the second quarter of Jerusalem, with a rough coat and a wooden staff. But that is a modern assumption overlaid onto an ancient text. If you look closely at the major tectonic, they are the high priest, the king's secretary, and 3 of the highest-ranking officials in the royal court in their hands. They carry the fragile, crumbling parchment of the newly discovered scroll. They have bypassed the bronze altar. They have bypassed the inner temple courts. They have bypassed the famous male prophets walking the very streets of the city. They hand the fate of the nation over to a woman named Huldah. She is the wife of the keeper of the wardrobe. But the men do not speak to her husband. They look directly at her, holding the terrifying words of Moses, and they ask her to interpret the wrath of God. She does not flinch. She does not ask for 3 days to fast and pray. She does not consult a commentary. And she certainly does not ask the high priest for his theological opinion. She simply opens her mouth. and the ancient water of the Nebiah bursts forth. Tell the man who sent you to me. Hear the razor edge in that sentence. She does not say, tell his majesty. She does not say, tell the sovereign king of Judah. She says, tell the man. Because in the unmediated presence of the prophetic word, earthly crowns immediately lose their weight.